Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I have the privilege and pleasure of welcome you to this fourth of the sessions on signs from Allah, history, science, and the soul in Islam. Inshallah, we'll have altogether 7 sessions. Today's session will take us through an intellectual excursion. We have been discussing the last 3 sessions the events from the passing away of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam till the time of Karbala. Today we will discuss the development of knowledge in Islam. Knowledge is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not something that we inherit from our parents. You cannot pass it on to your children on a piece of paper. And you cannot destroy it in an earthquake or accident. It is truly a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this gift was given to Adam alayhi salam. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught him all the names. And anything and everything that we know as human beings has its origin from that proclivity, a tendency, or capability that all human beings have to learn. There is no such thing as a dumb person or an intelligent person. Everyone has the same inherent and intrinsic ability to learn. The differences are because of physiological or sociological reasons, not inherited from Adam alayhi salam, not that. When you look at the tree of knowledge, we must understand, because the subject matter of today is very important, especially for an intellectual gathering such as this, because it will lay the foundation for understanding how we came to be where we are in terms of how we look upon knowledge. And also, it will help us understand some of the constraints that we face in the acquisition and dissemination of knowledge. I'll cover a broad territory. It's necessary to start initially about knowledge of knowledge itself. What is knowledge? Succinctly, that is, summarily, you can think of knowledge as a tree, as an analogy, so that we all remember it. This tree has its roots and its trunk. Let's call that ilmul laduni. Ilm laduni. Ilm laduni is what comes to us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In its highest form is revealed through the prophets. It is what is written on Luh Mahfuz, the tablet that is preserved, portions of which are revealed through the prophets to humankind. And indeed, all of the knowledge that is given to human beings comes through ilm al-laduni in one form or the other. If we interpret the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught the names to Adam alayhi salam, then everything that we know falls under ilm al-laduni, because we inherited what we know through our blood relationship from Adam and Eve, from our parents and grandparents, all the way to the first man who received the revelation, who was taught by the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This trunk has 2 major branches. One branch is ilmul ibara, The other branch is ilmul ishara. Ibara is ain, be, alif, re, te. Ibarat in Urdu. In Arabic is ibara. Linguistically, ibara means to wade. For instance, ladies would not go through this experience, but some men might have noticed that when it rains and you're crossing a little small stream, the water that comes at you doesn't rise slowly. All of a sudden, it comes in a wave, in waves of 4 feet or 4, like so. Ibara means to wade. You walk through. To wade across a stream from one end to the other, that is the literal meaning of ibara. Ibara also means that which is written, that can be written. So all knowledge that can be written or transmitted is ilmul ibara. It includes everything we learn in school. English, mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, medicine, engineering, IT, no IT, carpentry. Anything that can be transmitted in writing or verbally is ilmul ibara. Then there is ilmul ishara, knowledge that cannot be expressed in words, but which is very profound. When the awliya Allah, for instance, talk about love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you cannot write down love. Love is a gift from Allah. Grace, rahmah, forgiveness. Indeed, the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fall under that category, ilmul ishara. Those who experience love, experience it. Those who don't experience it, you cannot teach a person to love. No. A mother loves a child because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the love of the child in her heart the moment of the birth of the child. Or a father indeed. That is ilmul ishara. And our forefathers excelled in the acquisition of all of these types of knowledge. Indeed, they excelled in especially the acquisition and transmission of ilmul ishara. It is most unfortunate in the last 200 years and now today that Muslims have said no to ilmul ishara. They have gone on and acquired and hang on to the outward manifestations of knowledge. Wash your hands up to here. When you do wudu, you don't do it here. Oh, your wudu is not all valid, my brother. Most unfortunate. Where are the Rumis of yesterday who said, you are not a drop in the ocean. You are the ocean in the drop. Where are people like that? Where are people like Abdul Qadir Jilani who said, don't stand on the sidelines in the ocean, afraid to get your feet wet. Dive into it. It's all metaphorical. Maybe by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you may find a gem or two. Dive into the ocean of knowledge. Where are the people like that? Do you meet people like that these days? You know, this day and age, humankind is inundated with noise. You wake up in the morning, you got these, the text, I don't even know. The IT, not IT. Tell me what are some of the things that you... WhatsApp, and what else? Facebook, what else? There you got it. And then you get in the car, you are bombarded. So much information, but no knowledge. No knowledge at all. From the morning till the evening, if you pray at night, you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what did I learn today? Most of the day, we did not learn anything because there was nothing to learn. You get information, disinformation, misinformation, fake information. information from Washington. I mean, but our forefathers had that ability to find that inner space in which they acquired knowledge. My brothers and sisters, lesson number 1 today, open your heart, open your minds to the knowledge that comes to you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Find that space, find that moment, find that time. The most apt time is after prayer. That is a definition of knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the knowledge to our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He gave the Quran, and through him we received it. As long as he was alive, as long as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was alive in the world, he was the embodiment of the Quran. That's the hadith from Hazrat Aisha Siddiqa. Asked to describe the Prophet, Hazrat Aisha Siddiqa said, he was an embodiment of the Quran. So people, when they had a question, they would go to him and they would ask, and he will give an answer, an elaboration. Now, here are a few definitions, because people engage in these kind of conversations with imperfect knowledge of the vocabulary. There is a difference between Sunnah, Hadith, and Seerah. Hadith is what the Prophet ﷺ said. Sunnah is what the Prophet ﷺ did. Seerah is the methodology that he used to do whatever he did. He did what he did because of the circumstances that he was facing. But the process that he went through is eternal. And hence the seerah of the Prophet has eternal implications. The sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is extremely important, but you must keep in mind the context of the sunnah. And the hadith, after you verify that is indeed an authentic hadith, you must also keep the context in mind. It's important. When the Prophet passed away, the Sahaba, as we discussed, were left with no leadership. They had to come to terms with the issues that they were facing. And hence the evolution of ijma, or the consensus. They looked at the Quran, the text, they looked at the Sunnah, the seerah of the Prophet. If there was a situation which was new, different from what the Prophet ﷺ had faced, they said, well, let's consult each other, and in the light of what we have learned from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, let's come up with a decision. Ijma, origin of ijma. I'll come to that as I go into it in terms of the various applications of ijma. And the Sahaba sometimes gave independent judgment also, because they were trained by the Prophet, especially Ali radiallahu anhu. Very often the questions were referred to him because he was knowledgeable. He was the doorway to the Prophet's knowledge. And even at the time of Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu, questions would be put to Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu. Even they see this Shia Sunni stuff, people misunderstand. Questions came to him, to Hazrat Ali. He gave the edicts or the fatwa, if you want to use the word fatwa. I don't like the word because it has the connotations that it does today. But indeed, he gave the fatwas. So the Sahaba sometimes gave independent opinions, which also became, as we'll see later, a principle of the development of fiqh. That was the second one. Then comes the day when the Sahaba passed away, and the time of Tabi'een. So, and the Tabi'een. And they would congregate around those who had learned from the Sahaba in halqas. They used to sit with the Shaykh, ask him questions, and they would learn. One of the famous halqas was that of Imam Jafar Sadiq, the beginning of the 8th century, which was frequented by no less a person than Imam Abu Hanifa, and later, according to some ahadith, also by Imam Malik. These great people were never afraid to learn from each other, Unlike today, we got this ego. You see a child and he has some knowledge. I say, oh, what, me? I got a PhD. I'm not going to learn from him. Or somebody else, oh, how you know? And if somebody contradicts you, you get angry. That's the way you defend. Don't you see that character? But look at the way we say we are Muslim. Examine the life of the Sahaba. Examine their methodology. Examine their character. They were never afraid to learn. To learn, not just to teach. They're afraid to learn. So, halqas. And this process also went on. And now let's move on a little bit as to what happens later. See, if you lived around the year 740, you see the Islamic Empire extend all the way from what is today Pakistan to the heartland of France, to the borders of Paris. All the countries that you see in the map, from Pakistan through West Asia, North Africa, Spain, and southern France, were a part of the Islamic Empire. Come on in, come on in. You're never too late. And people are entering the fold of Islam from the east and the west. The Hindus from Sindh, the Zoroastrians from Iran, the Christians from Egypt and North Africa and Syria, and the disbelievers from Arabia. They're all coming into the fold of Islam, and each one of them had its own way of looking at the transcendent. Hinduism is an ancient religion. Christianity is much more ancient, much older than Islam. There were also converts from Judaism. Zoroastrianism is a very old, ancient religion. Each one of them had their own ways of looking at the transcendent. So they had their own questions to ask. Remember, in this empire, the Umayyads had established cantonments, military cantonments. Kufa was one of them. Samarkand was another one of them. Medina was another. Damascus, Fustat or Cairo was another of them. These cantonments. And because of trade and commercial interactions, some of these cantonments grew to be big cities. Specifically, Kufa in southern Iraq became what is like today New York City, a melting pot, because situated as it was at the crossroads of commercial interactions between the Persian Gulf and Persia, which is Iran, and what is today Pakistan and western coast of India, people came to Kufa from many different backgrounds with many different questions. Medina was at the center, the heartland of Islam, and the people in Medina had different social contexts and different questions. Now the development of fiqh. I'll give you another definition. Very often, people engage in discussions about the Sharia as if they know. Most people, there are alims, there are educated people, there are well-known people. Most people do not know the difference between fiqh and Sharia. On the radio waves, they talk about Sharia law. Doesn't mean anything at all. It's a meaningless word. Sharia is the eternal, unchanging law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the definition of Sharia. The sun rises from the east, that is Sharia. The moon goes around the earth, that is Sharia. Our sun goes around our Milky Way galaxy in its orbit, that is Sharia. There was or there was not any Big Bang, there was Sharia. We were born because we were born. We don't know why we were born, but we were born because we were born. That is also Sharia by the diktat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Things that are unchanging. Sharia is the unchanging, eternal law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran is a book of guidance, hidayah. Guidance means it gives you an upper bound and a lower bound. It's like the freeway. You have the right side and the left side, except that most often the roadway is very broad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to succeed. He wants us to drive our cars on the freeway and not go off and have a wreck. The Quran is a book of hidayah. So now the people in Kufa, when they ask a question, the mujtahideen were faced with the challenge of answering those questions. Mujtahid comes from the word jahada. Jahada means struggle, to strive, to work hard. For instance, in simple Arabic, you may say, jahada Ibrahimu alal madrasa. Ibrahim works hard in the school. Good boy. Gets a good grade. Struggle. Now, in this context, jihad means an intellectual exercise to rigorously apply the Sharia to the problems that we face on a day-to-day basis. That is ijtihad. People talk about, we are going to reform Islam. Come on, study a little bit about Islamic history. Islam always had ijtihad. It's still there. Ijtihad is not dead, except that we don't apply it. Islam always had a Reformation movement. Ijtihad means to struggle intellectually in a rigorous manner based upon knowledge and apply the Sharia to the problems that you face today or yesterday. And each generation have faced that challenge of ijtihad. So that's the definition of fiqh. Fiqh is applied ijtihad. I'll give you an analogy. There is Newton's law of motion, F equals ma. And you can apply Newton's law of motion to design a satellite, a rocket ship, a car, a bullock cart, a table, a house. Each one is an application of Newton's law. The Sharia, I'm just giving an analogy, by the way, this is just only for communication purposes. Sharia is like the law. And the various applications of it are the fiqh, various fiqh. And you'll see later what happened to fiqh. It became a mazhab, but we'll come to that later. So now, the evolution of fiqh. Fiqh is the historical dimension of the Sharia. The historical dimension. Fiqh is not Sharia. Fiqh is applied Sharia. Very important to engage in a discussion based upon knowledge. Now let's apply it. What happened was, in Kufa, which was a melting pot, the great mujtahid, Imam al-Azam Abu Hanifa, he was the first of the great mujtahids, a scholar of first rank, a scientist, a city planner, an engineer, an architect, and the founder, as we call him, of the Hanafi fiqh. So he's faced with this problem. What sources do I go to answer the questions that are posed to me by the Hindus and the Zoroastrians and the Christians and the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Arabs? And so he comes up with the principles of fiqh. It's a very broad subject, by the way. What I'm exposing to you here is only the fundamentals, just scratching the surface. fiqh is a very broad subject. Obviously, if textually you find something in the Quran, that's law. If you find something in the verified Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, that is law. Then the third source, if the Sahaba, those who knew the Prophet ﷺ, if they agreed upon a certain decision, ijtihad, that is the law. And then even that was not enough, because sometimes a question may not have been faced by the Sahaba, for which a direct textual explanation may not be available in the Quran. Direct, I emphasize that. Maybe there is inferred. Similarly, perhaps there is no direct application of something that the Prophet said or did. Then what principles do you use? And it was a genius of Imam Abu Hanifa that in addition to the sources that I just mentioned, he came up with the principle of qiyas, which means analogy. A decision has been given. Here is a situation that is analogous. So that is, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, an acceptable principle of fiqh. Then if there is no analogy at all, then what do? He came up with the principle of istihsan, from the root word hasana, that which is in the public good. These were the 5 broad principles enunciated by Imam Abu Hanifa as tools for any judge in the future, for all times. So that using these tools, a judge in the future, 1,000 years after him, would be able to give guidance to someone who came up with a question. Secondly, Imam Abu Hanifa was very open-minded, because the environment was like that. There is a saying ascribed to Imam Abu Hanifa. He said at one time, the iman of a converted Turk is the equal of the iman of a person who lives in Medina. Why Turks? Those days, Turks are the Central Asian people. They were sort of uncouth at the time, not the Turks of today. They would walk into prayer with shoes on and dirt. They were nomadic people. But he was very open-minded. And hence his fiqh reflects the character of Imam Abu Hanifa and also the social, economic, and political conditions in Kufa. A generation later, almost about a half a generation later, Imam Malik in Medina similarly was faced with similar issues. But the people who asked the questions from Medina had different social milieu. People would come to Makkah and Medina from North Africa, from Africa because of the pilgrimage, from Spain, Egypt, Syria. They would bring their questions. Imam Malik looked at what Imam Abu Hanifa had done. He tightened the rules a little bit. He was concerned that the principle of istihsan might open the door to innovation. And he was also somewhat concerned that the principle of qiyas may also open the door to disagreements. So he tightened the rules of ijtihad and qiyas. And when it comes to ijma, whereas Imam Abu Hanifa had said that even if one Sahaba had taken a position, that's enough, Imam Malik said, no, it had to be a preponderant opinion. Then a generation later, we have Imam Shafi'i in Damascus. The first 2 mujtahideen did not write down their fiqh that is ascribed to them. It was 200 years later it was documented. But Imam Shafi'i had his Risala. He was the first one to try to document the principles of fiqh. He went to Medina, he went to Kufa, studied from those who had learned from these two great mujtahideen, came back, started a Risala, and the fiqh that is named after him, Shafi'i fiqh, is practiced in Syria, Egypt, and because of historical reasons, very often in the Malay Peninsula. And of course, other places too. Imam Shafi'i's fiqh is somewhat in between in terms of its strictness. Just giving you some taste of what happened between the positions taken by Imam Abu Hanifa and the positions taken by Imam Malik. He is somewhat in between. For instance, Imam Shafi'i does not accept istihsan, and he tightened the rules for qiyas. Another great one. Now comes some intellectual turbulence in the Islamic world. The Muslims, you see, one of the things I want to communicate to you is that there is no such thing as Dini Talim and Dunevi Talim. If you look at the life history, the training, the capability, and the contributions of any of the greats for the first 500 years of Islamic life, you will find that yes, first they were trained in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, but they were also trained in philosophy, in mathematics, in locution, in kalam, and they were also innovators. So the Muslims now come across the intellectual disciplines of the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, the rational method. Today, you can say our civilization is rational. People say, I can figure out anything. Sure enough. They don't understand the limits of reason. They ask dumb questions, people. They say, how can you prove to me that God exists? Haven't you heard those kind of square-headed people talking square-headed questions? How can you talk to people who do not know what they're asking? If a man does not know that you eat hot curry, your tongue is going to burn, how can you tell him don't eat hot curry? Look, it's best not to talk to those kind of people because they have not been trained, and it leads to just arguments. Goes around and says, how can you prove? How can you prove? And yet the same man will accept that yes, there was a Big Bang, as if his grandfather was there at the time of Big Bang, holding a clock, and he said, oh yeah, he says it was the Big Bang. Yeah, the Big Bang. Maybe it was a small bang. So the rational method challenges the Muslims to justify their faith in rational terms. The good thing, the characteristic of the rational method is its power, its logic. It makes sense. Why does it make sense? Because Allah created the universe according to a certain logic, according to a certain structure, which is reflected in reason. And we are a part of the universe. We are not out there. We are a part of it. And hence, it appeals. Those who can relate to the structure of the universe are reasonable people. So now they love this technique. The Muslims, remember, they're open. They're not like us. And they say, we will adopt it. And with enthusiasm, they started to apply reason to everything that they came across. They applied it to nature, they applied it to sociology, they applied it to politics, but they fell flat on their face because they also did not understand its limits. They applied it to matters of faith. So the beliefs, I've documented it all in the encyclopedia as to what their assumptions and so on. They were muwahhids. They believed in the uniqueness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as in Surah Al-Ikhlas. They also believed in the free will of man. And the positions were backed up by the ayahs in the Quran. This is another thing you should remember. No matter what upheaval took place in Islamic history, those who are on one side or those who are on the other, they all justified their positions according to certain ayahs in the Quran. If they did not justify them, people will reject them. They justified the positions on free will of man. They applied it to the Quran. Since they believed that Allah is one, it's not a good translation. Allah is Ahad, unique. We cannot also put, according to their rational approach, Quran also in the same space, because the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore, according to their thinking, it must have been created. See the error that people fall into when they don't know the limits of a technique. It's so much easier to talk to a knowledgeable person. You learn something, you give something. But people who have not walked up there and they ask a question, they have not come to that limit, is difficult. So many PhDs have never gone through this process of understanding the limit of what they have learned. Great universities teach you that. There are a few great universities in America. But most universities are not great. You can get a PhD. But they don't teach you the limits of what they have learned. So they applied, fell flat on their face. In the meantime, since they were so enthusiastic about knowledge, the Khalifas, which is the first phase of the Abbasid dynasty, from the year 750 till year 846, so let's say 850, they established the Baitul Hikmah in Baghdad. The house of hikmah, wisdom. Not Baitul Ilm. Each word, they were so careful. Geniuses, great people. It was a center of excellence for wisdom, integration of all kinds of knowledge. They brought in books from India, the Siddhanta of Aryabhatta from India, the wisdom of the Zoroastrians, paper making and china making from China, the works of Aristotle and Plato and Galen and all the Greek greats from the Mediterranean world, and combined it all and developed new disciplines. Some of the new disciplines that they developed were algebra, chemistry, trigonometry, transmitted the decimal system and the numerals from India, advances in astronomy, discoveries in medical sciences, the identification of smallpox and chickenpox, the differentiation between those diseases that are transmitted and those that are not transmitted. The relationship between the environment and health, food and health. The relationship between physical well-being and spiritual well-being. They came up with all of these disciplines, new disciplines. And they're also inventors. This is the age of robotics. The first person who experimented with robotics was a Muslim in the 10th and the 11th century. His name temporarily doesn't come to my mind, and it will come to mind in a minute. Robotics. And this engineer, he also experimented with trying to fly. It is said that he built something out of cloth, went up on the third floor or the fourth floor of the tallest building, and to prove to people that he could fly, he jumped down. Of course, he fell down. Fortunately, he survived. His name will come to my mind. Please make a note of it.
Can you repeat it? Abbas bin Farnas.
Ibn Farnas.
Ibn Farnas. So you see, The Muslims were integrated. They were not afraid of Chinese knowledge, Hindu knowledge, Greek knowledge, Christian knowledge, Jewish knowledge. No, they were not. They took it all. They had the confidence. The difference between a thriving culture and a culture that is retracting is that a thriving culture is open. It has the confidence to face any thought, any idea, no matter where it comes from. Even a thought or idea that is hostile. Whereas a culture that is not sure of itself retracts itself. Look at Muslims today. Halal, shirk, gosh, right, left, bidah, shirk, kufr. I mean, he can't move. So the Muslims adopted the Greek ideas, but they fell flat on their face, and there was a reaction from the Muslims. They said, well, how can you say that the Quran was created? Why did they were called the Mutazilis, the rationalists, fall flat on their face? Why? Because they did not understand the nature of time. Inshallah, we'll discuss another. There are 16 different descriptions of time in the Quran. No one knows. Not even the Prophet knew what time was. No one knows the nature of time. It's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is a matrix in which the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finds its fulfillment. We know how to use it. We know how to perhaps characterize it, but we don't know what it is. You take string theory, whatever theory, no, it always is there. They did not understand what time was, and therefore, unable to come to terms with it, they said, well, this has to be here and that has to be there, instead of saying, look, we just don't know. That's another characteristic of a great man. You find a great man will say, I don't know. It's okay. A man who is an empty pot with a couple of coins in it says, oh, I know everything. Just give me your money, that's all. Haven't you seen that? The differences. The reaction from the Muslims was fast and furious. Imam Ahmed was the one who led the resistance against the Mutazilites because of their extreme positions. He was imprisoned, flogged, jailed, suffered, and he was backed up by a large number of people. Ultimately, in the year 846, Khalifa al-Mutawakkil, he said, enough is enough. We don't now follow the Mutazilite school. We are going to go back to the Usuli schools, ulama. The fiqh that came about as a result of this protest movement was the Hanbali fiqh. It was a protest fiqh in a very specific environment, and therefore it tends to be extremely, I hate to use the word rigid, but it's extremely conservative, searching for a better word. Unless there is something in the Quran, verifies Sunnah of the Prophet, the collective ijma of the Sahaba, no other position would be acceptable in the Hanbali fiqh. It would be called an innovation or bid'ah. Why? If you want to understand Saudi Arabia, which follows the Hanbali fiqh, you have to know the historical origin of the Hanbali fiqh. It came about as a result of a protest movement. And then we have a period of about 300 to 400 years in which things sort of settled down a little bit, but the questions that people had faced continued to haunt the Muslims. How do you explain phenomena, natural phenomena? The issue of before and after. It's a very profound question. I'll just expose you to the ideas of al-Ash'ari. The Ash'arites, that they're called, the ideas of Ash'ari have had a profound impact on Islamic history. The contribution of al-Ash'ari was the following. Unlike the Mutazilites, who took a linear view of time, an analog view of time, in other words, continued flow of time, Al-Ash'ari said time can be divided into small segments, the atomistic view. If you divide a moment of time into a large number of parts, infinite number of parts, the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intervenes at each interval and makes things happen. It was a breakthrough, conceptual breakthrough. And it temporarily solved the problem of those who were struggling with the issue of before and after, cause and effect. But there are problems with the position of Al-Ash'ari also. Most of the greats that we read about in history, for instance, Imam al-Ghazali was an Ash'arite. Allama Iqbal was an Ash'arite. Most of the greats in the Sunnah schools of fiqh in the Islamic world tend to be Ash'arites, whether or not we are consciously aware of the fact that they're Ash'arites, because even though the ideas of Imam al-Ash'ari had such profound impact, there was no fiqh, school of fiqh named after him. The ideas got absorbed like water in sand and became a part of the Islamic milieu. And many of the arguments, if you read carefully Ihya al-Ulum of Imam al-Ghazali, many of the arguments that he starts with are based upon the assumptions, propositions, and theories of Imam al-Ash'ari. Great man, made a fundamental contribution. But the problem with the proposition of al-Ash'ari remains the same, namely, no matter how small an instant of time you take, what happens between one moment and the other? The issue does not go away, except in a mathematical sense. If you take a limit, you say in the limit, then the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes continuous. But nonetheless, it was a very, very major philosophical breakthrough. And in this interregnum, about 300 or 400 years ago, Islamic philosophy and Islamic science thrived not as mainline vocations of people because of the experience that they had with the Mutazilites, but as a vocation that was sometimes encouraged and sometimes pursued in the fringes. However, what was tolerated, what was permitted, what was supported by either the court in Baghdad or the Fatimids in Egypt or the local courts in places such as Isfahan and Samarkand and Khartaba in the Far East, or Khairawun in North Africa, what was supported by the local potentates was enough to make this age the age of excellence, what we call the classical age of Islam. It was during this period when the Muslims applied logic, philosophy, mathematics, the learnings that they had from the East and the West, to nature, to sociology, to an understanding of other cultures. So much so that everyone in the world recognizes this age to be the classical age of Islam. So we have to ask ourselves, what were some of the contributions? I mentioned some. Let's look at geography, for instance. The Muslims wanted to understand the world. They wanted to know whether the world was round or it was flat, as the Greeks assumed. Al-Masudi, a great geographer, he traveled through North Africa, Ceylon, west coast of India. Some say he went all the way to Canton and wrote a well-known book. He also alluded to travels to what is today the Americas. Alluded to it. Says there was a shipload of people from the coast of Spain who sailed west and came back several months later. Al-Masudi, a good example. Al-Razi, a great physician. Al-Khwarizmi, Most of you, not most of you, most of the people here in this area are computer engineers, algorithms, the inventor of algorithms. Al-Khwarizmi, we pay tribute to him. They studied music, al-Kindi. Today, you say the word music, immediately people will denounce you. This is haram. I'll share with you the following thing. About 40 years ago, one of my good friends, Dr. Kamal Hassan, went back to Malaysia. He got a PhD from Columbia. And they started the Islamic University of Malaysia. That's 45 years, almost, about 45 years ago. And they wanted to establish a discipline of a study of music. And there was so much uproar that finally they gave it all up and they called it a study of sound. I'll share this with you. This is a small technical observation from a scientist. When you study wave theory, you can show that there are basically two different kinds of waves. Compression wave, an earthquake, for instance, produces compression wave. And shear waves. Shear waves travel as a shear, like so. And all of them are related from a higher order equation. You can derive both what we call P waves and S waves from the same discipline. If you study only sound, you study only the P waves, nothing about the shear waves, nothing about what happens in an airplane if it's coming down and it faces that air shear. Sometimes what happens as the airplane comes down is that because of the temperature gradient, different layers have different densities and different directions of movement. So an airplane that's coming down, let's say about 200 miles an hour for landing, one instant is facing wind in a certain direction at 50 miles an hour, and all of a sudden faces wind 50 miles an hour in the opposite direction. It's 100 miles an hour, about 50% drop, boom, falls down. How can you study it? What has happened to our people that we must now?
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Does the prayer start immediately?
Allahu Akbar,
8:15.
Okay, I'll be done in 5 minutes, inshallah. May I continue? I'll wait. Let's hear the wazn.
10 minutes.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
Please do not misunderstand me. I'm not eschewing, recommending music that we hear in the airwaves today. I am defending the study of wave theory. Without knowing wave theory, you do not know electromagnetism. You do not know anything about satellites or rockets. Without wave theory, you practically know nothing. That's all I'm recommending in here. It started with the Muslims. Al-Hindi was one of them. Al-Tabari was another one of them who studied music in the 8th century, 9th century. It was all lost. Al-Biruni, who went to India with Mahmud of Ghazna from your area, studied all about the Hindus. And whatever we know about the Hindus is through his writings. He translated the books from Sanskrit into Farsi and Arabic, wrote a history of India, which became the source for our knowledge of the ancient knowledge of the Vedic civilization. Such were the great people for 500 years, because they had their faith in their heart. Iman. Iman, faith, is the source of knowledge, the source of confidence. When we believe in Allah, we are not afraid of anything. When you're afraid of Allah, you're not afraid of anything. When you do sajda before Allah, you will never do sajda before anything else. They had iman, they had the certainty of faith. Our faith is weak. We are afraid of our own shadows. We are afraid of, this is from the West. We'll cover that in one of our sessions as to how it was that they did not even want to adopt printing press for 300 years because it came from the West, even though they had it. In summary, we talk about the classical age. We take pride in the classical age, and rightfully so. It was a great period. Question is why? Summarily, because those people had the love of Allah in their hearts. They had the certainty of faith, the confidence that comes from faith. They had the love of the Prophet, the confidence that comes from the love of the Prophet. The confidence to learn from their own and from others. If it was good, they adopted it. If it was not good, they rejected it. One of the differences. So, when we study this subject as signs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I'll show you my signs on the horizon, and within your own souls, within your own selves, until you have certainty of faith, we must read the signs in nature, become great scientists. Of 900 people who have earned the Nobel Prize, only 3 have been Muslims. And most of the Nobel Prizes that have gone to Muslims have been for such fantastic achievements as bringing peace. There is no peace in the Islamic world. Acquire knowledge, because it's the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, not just sciences of nature, sociology, history, the sciences of the soul. That's one area where we clearly excel. All we have to do is to mine the database that we have from these greats, get to know it, pass it on to our children, so that they can hold their head high when they talk to other people, our spirituality, and project that spiritual face of Islam to the world. You want to do dawah? Learn Islamic spirituality. Dawah is not my beard, no, not this hat. This is not dawah. Dawah is, people became Muslim in Ceylon and India and China and Indonesia because they looked at the character of the people. They saw that light shine from their hearts. They said, these are great people, we want to be like them. Not because they wore long clothes, or long beards. I don't even know if they had beards, whatever. No. So, in summary, knowledge is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Honor knowledge. Honor those with knowledge. Cultivate it. Preserve it and transmit it. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah.